One of the things we told you that we were going to be taking a special look at over the course of our time together are things called primary source documents. And those are uh, words spoken or written by people in the time period where history is happening. So we're going to look at um, kind of our first um, example of that. Um, that's not a famous document like the Constitution or the Declaration of Independence, though it does have a lot to do with the Constitution. We're going to look at a group called the Federalist Papers. And here's where we get into a little bit of a situation. Obviously, starting as we are with the founding fathers and going back all that way, um, we are dealing with language that can be a little more daunting. They just don't talk or write the way that we do today. One of the first um, assignments you're going to do for us actually has to do with the Federalist Papers and what are called the Anti-Federalist Papers. And what I want to encourage you to do is as you're looking at these things, um, don't be afraid to pull up a summary of something like this that you see. Those summaries can help you if you read it beforehand. It can kind of give you an idea of what to be looking for. If it's something that you're doing after the fact, it can help you make sense of something that you read. You can even do it as you're going along through what you're reading and saying, "Hey, I'm going to look at this and I'm going to go back and see if I can tell," and that'll help you start to interpret what these people are saying and make some sense out of these documents. So as we look at the Federalist Papers, something I want you to keep in mind as you start to do the assignment with the Anti-Federalist Papers, something definitely to keep in mind. So what are the Federalist Papers? Well, basically, once the Constitution is written, right, we said that Constitutional Convention, they come together in 1787. They're wanting to replace um, the Articles of Confederation, which had been the first written form of government in the United States. Um, and so people are starting to, once the Constitution is written, uh, the founders, the people that liked the Constitution, needed to get 9 out of the 13 states to ratify the Constitution. Right, so they've got to talk 9 out of the 13 states into ratifying the Constitution for it to become the supreme law of the land. They also have to make sure that Virginia and New York are going to come along because those are the two most important states in kind of this early period. Most of the people live there. They have the most money, the most power, the most prestige. So if you're going to form a new government, those two states have to sign off on it. Well, in Virginia, you've got a lot of the Constitution being written by Virginians, and so they can go back and kind of make that case. It's New York that you've got to convince um, to ratify the Constitution. And so that's where the Federalist Papers are going to come in. These are just newspaper articles addressing concerns people had about the Constitution um, that are going to try to convince people to then talk to their representatives and senators and say, "Hey, you need to adopt this new Constitution." And so that's where they're going to be um, kind of focusing, as these are supposed to be arguments to influence public opinion. And so they're going to appear from October of 1787 to August of 1788 in newspapers, mostly, like I said, in New York, but in different places, and just kind of address different issues. I'm just going to pick a couple and highlight them for you. There were originally supposed to be, I think, 15 of these or something like that. There were more than 70 that are going to be written. They're written under the pseudonym, the fake name of Publius, but they're actually written by three really famous guys in American history. Alexander Hamilton, you've probably heard of because if you've got Disney Plus, you've seen the musical that is based on his life. John Jay and James Madison, though, are two um, very important kind of founding fathers from this early period. Alexander Hamilton is the first Secretary of the Treasury. He was an assistant to George Washington during the Revolutionary War. He is responsible basically for creating the federal financial system of the early United States. He was a prominent politician. People knew him, read his writings, and so he's a heavy hitter in his time. James Madison is the author of the Constitution. He was Secretary of State. He will go on after this time period to be President of the United States, and so he's going to be an extremely important guy. John Jay is probably the one, maybe if you haven't heard of one of these guys that you haven't heard of. John Jay is the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, which is laid out in Article 3, right, of the Constitution, he's going to be the guy that's there leading that court and helping establish the judicial system. He'll also be a governor of New York later, has a lot of different jobs. But these three guys are arguing for the Constitution. Now, the assignment you're going to do is one that deals with the anti-federalist. So these guys that are making arguments against, but there are some famous guys that are there too that you'll explore. Federalist number 10, right? One of the arguments against the Constitution was that the government was too large. And James Madison is going to take this one on, and in addressing this concern, he said, no, a large government isn't going to be a bad thing. It's actually going to be a good thing. Because if we've got a large government, that's going to keep it from being under the influence of really small groups of people, small special interest groups, right? We hear that term today, special interest groups. It's people who have kind of one main issue that they are concerned about. And so James Madison is saying, look, if we've got a big government, we don't have to worry about little groups of people pulling it in one direction or another. It's going to be easier for the government to avoid kind of falling into that trap. So that's Federalist Paper number 10. Federalist Paper number 39 tells people, hey, basically what a republic is, what kind of government the Constitution is going to be setting up. He's going to reiterate what we saw in the Declaration of Independence, where the power of a government comes from the people. Matter of fact, if you look at the first words of our Constitution, it says we the people. Not we the government, not we the states. We the people establish this Constitution. It tells them how they're going to have representatives that are elected from among them, right? That's what a representative democracy or a republic is basically everybody's not going to vote. We're going to vote for representatives who are going to carry our voice and opinion then to the federal government. And he basically said, look, we're not going to have term limits on these people. They're just going to be limited by the number of times that they can be elected. Right? So they're going to have to stand for election every 2 years for the House of Representatives or every 6 years for the Senate. They're going to have to stand, and so they'll have to answer for the way they've been representing the people. Federalist number 51, Madison is going to describe the checks and balances that are built into the United States government. People were freaked out, right, that a king was going to come back. And Madison says, no, we've built this government so that every part of it is watching over the other two. So if we've got three branches, if we've got the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch, they're all looking at each other and making sure that none of them are trying to get away with anything. And they've got powers over the other one, right? The executive branch, the president can veto a law that Congress has passed. The Supreme Court can declare that law unconstitutional. Well, the legislative branch can override a veto if they have enough votes, or they can change the Constitution. Both really hard, but again, kind of push back. The president appoints Supreme Court justices, but they have to be confirmed by the legislature, right? The legislature or the Supreme Court can declare laws unconstitutional. And so every piece of our government has a way of keeping watch on the other two pieces. And so that balance between the three was supposed to keep them all more honest. So that was an important one. The last one I want to highlight is one that Alexander Hamilton is going to make the argument about, and it's our judicial branch. People were scared to death of the courts because the courts in England had been notoriously corrupt. And so what he basically said was that the judicial branch is going to be the weakest part of our government, right? The argument was made, they even talked about the idea of should justices get lifetime appointments, right? Our justices serve for their entire lives. And basically, the idea was they wanted to do that to keep them from being above politics, right? If you've got to make a decision that's not going to be very popular, you don't want to have to worry about, well, if I do this, then I'm not going to get reelected. It was kind of to relieve them of that stress and just say, hey, you do what you think is right in this situation. And so, like I said, there are dozens and dozens of these Federalist Papers, each one making an argument pro-Constitution. It was obviously successful because the Constitution is going to be adopted. New York is one of the states that adopts the Constitution. But if you want to look at the way our government is supposed to work, kind of an outline of how this is all supposed to go, this is a great place to go look. Are these Federalist Papers, because you're seeing the arguments that the guys who actually wrote the documents are making about what their intent was, how they saw things working when they sat down to do these particular things. And so they make for an interesting read. That's the Federalist Papers.